Welcome to our deep dive into a sitcom that really shook things up. Roseanne. Imagine like late 80s, early 90s, and you're flipping through channels. And most sitcoms, they're all sunshine and perfect families, but then you land on the Connors. They're struggling, they're loud, they're real. And today we're going to unpack why Roseanne was such a cultural phenomenon and how it really kind of changed the landscape of television. Drawing on some really interesting analysis we have on the show's impact.
Yeah, what's so fascinating is that Roseanne, they didn't shy away from the realities that many Americans were facing at the time. The economic boom of the 80s was fading, and a lot of families felt that shift.
Before we even meet the Connors, set the scene for us.
Yeah.
What was the social and economic climate of America like back then?
Well, think about it. Manufacturing jobs were disappearing. Wages were stagnating. Cost of living was on the rise. And that American dream of a comfortable middle-class life felt increasingly out of reach for many. There was this underlying anxiety that wasn't really being reflected in popular culture, especially not in the happy-go-lucky world of sitcoms.
Right. And then the Connors come along, and they're dealing with those exact anxieties, right? Job insecurity bills piling up, just trying to keep their heads above water.
Exactly. And suddenly you had a working-class family on primetime TV, and they weren't just the wacky neighbors or the comic relief. They were the main characters, and their struggles were front and center. This was a huge departure from the sitcoms of the time, which tended to focus on middle-class or even affluent families with relatively minor problems.
Yeah, it's like Roseanne held up a mirror to a part of America that was often overlooked or stereotyped.
Speaking of breaking the mold, let's talk about the force of nature. That is Roseanne Connor, played by the one and only Roseanne Barr. The show drew heavily from Barr's own stand-up comedy and her working-class background. How did that translate to the character we see on screen?
I mean, Roseanne Connor was loud, brash, and unapologetically herself. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even if it meant challenging authority or societal norms. She worked a blue-collar job, struggled to make ends meet, juggled the demands of family life with a sharp wit and a whole lot of sarcasm.
And it wasn't just that she was working class. She was a woman who was working class, which added a whole other layer to her character, right?
Absolutely. At the time, there were very few portrayals of working mothers on television, and even fewer who were as outspoken and defiant as Roseanne Connor. She challenged traditional gender roles, both within her family and in the workplace. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty to crack jokes and to stand up for herself, even when it wasn't ladylike. The source we're looking at calls it an authentic representation of blue-collar life. What were some of the ways that Roseanne went beyond just showing financial struggles and really captured the nuances of that experience?
I think it was in the details. The way they decorated their house, the kinds of food they ate, the way they talked to each other, even the way they argued. It felt real, and it resonated with viewers who recognized themselves in the Connors' struggles and triumphs. For example, remember the episode where they had to fix their leaky roof themselves because they couldn't afford a repairman? Or the time when Dan had to take on a second job to make ends meet? These were situations that millions of Americans were facing, and Roseanne wasn't afraid to show the humor and the heartbreak of those experiences.
And they fought. Oh boy, did they fight. But it always felt like a real family fighting, not some sanitized sitcom version of conflict.
Exactly. There was a rawness and honesty to their arguments. That was refreshing. They yelled, they slammed doors, they said things they probably regretted later. But they always came back together. There was this underlying love and loyalty that held them together even when they were at each other's throats.
I love that you brought up the arguments because that brings me to something the source highlighted. Roseanne Connor, as a character, was unapologetically flawed but fiercely devoted to her family. Were there any specific moments from the show that really captured this duality for you?
Oh, there are so many. Think about the episode where she loses her temper at Darlene's school play because she feels like Darlene isn't being given the same opportunities as other students. Roseanne's reaction is completely over the top, but it comes from a place of deep love and a desire to protect her daughter.
And it's not just that she wants to protect her kids, she wants to see them succeed, even if it means pushing them out of their comfort zones.
Right. She has these incredibly high expectations for her children, and she doesn't let them get away with anything. She's constantly pushing them to be better, to think for themselves, to stand up for what they believe in. And she does it all with a mix of tough love humor and a deep understanding of their individual strengths and weaknesses. It's that kind of nuanced parenting that you rarely saw on television at the time.
It's funny. My family wasn't blue collar in the same way the Connors were. But I still related so much to that dynamic. The bickering, the sarcasm, the moments of genuine tenderness mixed with a whole lot of frustration. It just felt like a real family.
That's what's so brilliant about Roseanne. It tapped into these universal truths about family relationships that transcended socioeconomic backgrounds. Love, frustration, loyalty, resentment, the desire to connect, the fear of letting each other down. These are emotions that everyone experiences, regardless of their income level or social status.
It's like Roseanne gave us permission to see the beauty and the chaos of family life, without judgment. And speaking of breaking down barriers, the source argues that Roseanne was a game changer, paving the way for a wave of sitcoms that embraced realism and diversity.
What's interesting here is that Roseanne didn't just reflect a shift in audience tastes. It actively shaped those tastes. It showed networks that there was an appetite for stories that were more grounded, more honest, and more representative of the diversity of American life.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give us some examples. What shows followed in Roseanne's footsteps? How did it change what audiences expected from TV families?
Well, you have shows like The King of Queens, which centered around a working-class couple in New York. They dealt with, money problems, in-law drama, and the everyday struggles of making a marriage work, all with that same down-to-earth humor that Roseanne made popular.
And Malcolm in the Middle comes to mind, too. They weren't blue-collar, but that show definitely embraced the chaos and dysfunction of family life in a way that felt very Roseanne-inspired.
Absolutely. Malcolm in the Middle took that idea of the imperfect family and ran with it. The parents were flawed, the kids were rebellious, and the whole show had this chaotic energy that was both hilarious and relatable. And it wasn't just about the family dynamics. Both Roseanne and Malcolm in the Middle found humor in the mundane aspects of everyday life. The struggles of working a dead-end job, the frustrations of dealing with teenagers, the little annoyances that make up the fabric of family life. All of that became fodder for comedy.
That's like they said, hey, life isn't always glamorous, but there's humor to be found even in the most ordinary moments. And you can even see Roseanne's influence on shows like Modern Family, which embraced a more diverse representation of family structures.
Right. Roseanne helped pave the way for shows to explore different kinds of families. Blended families, same-sex couples, adopted children. It challenged the very notion of what a normal family looked like.
So Roseanne didn't just change what we saw on TV, it changed how we saw it. It brought a new level of honesty and realism to the sitcom genre.
And it's important to remember that Roseanne wasn't just about laughs. It tackled some pretty complex social issues, often in ways that were groundbreaking for the time.
That's a great point. This source actually calls out how Roseanne was willing to address topics that many other sitcoms simply wouldn't touch. Can you give us some examples of how they approached these issues and what kind of impact it had?
Well, one of the most notable examples was the episode where Roseanne's boss makes unwanted sexual advances toward her. This was a bold move for a sitcom in the early 90s, and it sparked a lot of important conversations about sexual harassment in the workplace.
Yeah, that scene was so powerful. You could feel Roseanne's anger, her humiliation, and her determination to stand up for herself. It definitely wasn't played for laughs.
Exactly. And that was a hallmark of Roseanne. They weren't afraid to tackle serious issues with sensitivity and nuance, but they also never lost sight of the importance of humor.
It's like they found this perfect balance between making you laugh and making you think. Do any other examples come to mind?
Well, they also addressed issues like gender roles and expectations. Remember the episode where Dan struggles with the idea of Roseanne going back to work? That episode really captured the anxieties of a lot of men at the time who felt like their traditional role as the breadwinner was being challenged.
And on the flip side, you have Roseanne grappling with the guilt and societal pressures of being a working mother. It felt very honest and very relatable.
And let's not forget about the episode where DJ brings home his girlfriend who is Black. That episode sparked a lot of important conversations about interracial relationships and the complexities of race in America.
Roseanne never shied away from those tough conversations, even if it meant making some viewers uncomfortable.
It's like they were saying, look, these are the issues that real families are dealing with, and we're not going to pretend they don't exist.
Now, before we wrap up this fascinating discussion, I have to ask, if Roseanne were on TV today, what issues do you think it would tackle?
Ooh, that's a great question. Given Roseanne Barr's own outspoken nature, I think the show would definitely dive headfirst into the political divide we're seeing in America today. They might explore the economic anxieties that are fueling those divisions, the role of social media in shaping political discourse, and the challenges of finding common ground in a polarized society.
I can totally see that. The Connors were never ones to shy away from a good political debate, even if it meant arguing around the dinner table.
And imagine the episodes they could do about the gig economy, the rising cost of healthcare, the struggles of working-class families in the face of automation and globalization.
They might even tackle cancel culture and the complexities of free speech in the age of social media.
It's interesting to think about how those timeless themes of family, work, and community would play out in today's world, with all its new challenges and anxieties.
It makes you wish there was still a show like Roseanne on TV, a show that was willing to be that raw, that honest, and that fearless in its exploration of the human experience.
I agree, there's definitely a void there. We need more shows that reflect the realities of everyday life, the struggles and triumphs of ordinary people, the complexities of social issues, and the messy beauty of family relationships.
It makes you wonder if Roseanne's willingness to kind of push the envelope is a part of the reason we don't see shows like it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't afraid to make people uncomfortable, to challenge social norms. And that could be pretty risky in today's climate.
Yeah, there's definitely a tension there. On the one hand, we want television to reflect the complexity of the real world, to engage with difficult topics, and to spark important conversations. But on the other hand, there's a fear of offending audiences, of alienating sponsors, of being caught in the crossfire of social media outrage.
Right, it's like walking a tightrope. How do you push boundaries without going too far? How do you provoke thought without provoking backlash?
Right, and that's the challenge for creators today. How do you find that sweet spot where you're being honest and authentic without being unnecessarily provocative? It's a delicate balance.
It makes you appreciate how groundbreaking Roseanne was for its time. I mean, they didn't have social media to contend with, but they still faced criticism and controversy for tackling taboo subjects.
One thing that stands out about Roseanne is that it never felt preachy or judgmental. They presented different perspectives. They let the characters grapple with complex issues, and they allowed the audience to draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, it's like they trusted their viewers to be intelligent enough to engage with the material without being spoon-fed the right answer.
Exactly, and that's something we could use more of today, a willingness to trust the audience, to challenge them, to provoke them, and to spark those thoughtful conversations that lead to greater understanding and empathy.
So for our listener, even if you weren't around when Roseanne first aired, or maybe you only have like vague memories of it, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's a fascinating time capsule of the late 80s and early 90s. But it also speaks to these timeless themes of family work and the challenges of navigating a world that's constantly changing.
It's a show that was both of its time and ahead of its time. And it's a reminder that great storytelling has the power to make us laugh, make us think, and make us see the world in new ways.
You know, Roseanne wasn't just a sitcom. It was a cultural phenomenon that challenged conventions and left an undeniable mark on the television landscape.
And we've explored its impact on the sitcom genre, its unflinching portrayal of working-class life, and its willingness to tackle tough social issues.
And it leaves us with this question. What would a show like Roseanne look like today? And what impact could it have on our cultural conversations?
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you seen Roseanne? What are your memories of the show? What issues do you think it would tackle if it were on TV today?
Jump into the comments and let us know. Until next time, keep those conversations going and keep diving deep